This week on the show, we're going to be sitting down to talk with Craig Rodrigues about Jenkins and the FreeBSD testing architecture. Following that, we're going to show you how to roll your own OpenBSD ISOs with all the patches already applied. I don't know about you, but ISO can't wait. This week's news and answers to all your emails on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 44, base ISO 100, recorded July 2nd, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Hey, we're glad to have you guys with us this week. I know for us in the U.S., it's July 4th weekend, so good holidays.
We just finished,
Stay safe, everyone.
Canada Day was yesterday here.
Oh, okay. Did you take the day off,
Yep.
or did you still work?
No, I took the day off.
There you go. There you go. Good for you. I know I'm always tempted, especially when you work at home. It's like you just kind of wander downstairs. Oh, let me just peek in on that and see what's going on.
Nobody will be around to bother me today.
Yeah. An hour and a half later, you're like, oh, yeah, that's right. It's a holiday today.
Double time.
Right? But anyway, have a safe holiday, everyone, this week. And we'll be glad to have you back next week, of course. But meanwhile, we got some cool news to get into. So first up, we got some pfSense news. Yes. It looks like a new release, 2.4.1 just came out.
2.1.4.
It's, or excuse me, 2.1.4. Yeah, a little dyslexic today, right? It's mainly a security release, it looks like. 8 security fixes. Most of them are pfSense specific, though.
It grabs the older and the more recent OpenSSL fixes from FreeBSD because they're using the... even though they're based on 8, they're using the newer OpenSSL to get some of the features for VPNs and stuff. And because of that, they obviously have to pull in the newer OpenSSL. And then they have a bunch of patches to their web UI and to their package system.
Yeah, they got a pretty extensive list of fixes here, UI fixes and whatnot. So this is a good excuse to upgrade your router. You should do this ASAP, just for the security reasons alone.
And they say their package sets also have their own independent fixes and will need updating as well. Okay.
Yep, so you'll definitely want to grab that. So again, service announcement. Get your pfSense routers updated now.
Yep, they fixed a bunch of things like the captive portal maximum logins reached error, leaking resources, causing problems. And a bunch of other
they had
stuff.
some other good stuff like deleting IP aliases when an interface is disabled. You don't want to leave those up. And they switched to some utilities around using curl instead of fetch to download their update files. So, just some neat backend stuff.
Quite a few fixes in here, so it definitely looks like it's worth upgrading.
Definitely. Well, cool. What's our next story this week, Alan? Something about Dragonfly and some PF news?
Yes, Dragonfly has updated their PF to be SMP, so it can do concurrent multiple CPUs. The state and IP fragment tables are now per CPU, so that it can track more stuff. Packet Pass acquire PF token shares instead of an exclusive lock, and packet processing runs concurrently, so different streams can be run on different processors and allow more traffic to go through by using more than one processor. And then any dynamic rule updates will be run synchronously for now, but that's just when you're changing rules. State expiration from the PF purge threads runs synchronously for now, although they're planning to fix that. And then they have an IOCTL and also PF sync pass acquired the PF token exclusively again. So anything when you're using PFCTL and so on.
Sweet. So it looks like this all stemmed from a user complaint, though, something I got posted to the mailing list. And Matthew Dillon himself actually went and did this own work on PF to make it SMP aware.
Although they've done it the Dragonfly way. So this is doesn't look like they actually just did the same way FreeBSD did.
That's cool.
But yeah, it'd definitely be interesting to even see some before and after packet per second rates and stuff from this.
And speaking of rates, we also have a link here. You can look at the mailing list where they found that changing some rule sets can help speed things up. So if you're on Dragonfly, you may want to take a look at your rules. Just make sure you're running optimally as possible.
I imagine those same might actually apply to FreeBSD as well.
That's cool. So good good information there for all PF users. So, of course, we're wondering when OpenBSD might do the same and do some SMP work on this.
Yeah, I don't know. For security reasons, they might have I thought they decided not to, but they might look at it again just because people have firewalls and they need performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, more and more systems, multi-core. So speaking of security, so we got some Cha-Cha news this week. So I guess Cha-Cha usage and deployment, we got some cool information here, a post over by talking about the cipher written by Dan Bernstein. And just some neat highlights about it. Of course, a while back we talked to DJM about some of the cryptography changes in OpenBSD 5.5 and OpenSSH 6.5. So this article is kind of an interesting follow-up to that, showing which projects have adopted Cha-Cha 20. So it looks like what OpenSSH is using it now is a stream cipher. OpenBSD is using it for random numbers. Google offers it in TLS for Chromium and some of their services, and a lot of other projects seem to be adopting it. So
some cool a Bitcoin derivative uses it.
Yeah, Yacoin.
Yeah.
And how many of those are there now? Speaking,
I don't know.
Quite a few. To get off on a tangent, but I think everybody thinks they're going to strike it rich by forking the code, changing 3 lines in the name.
Yeah.
I mined the first 50 million of them.
Yeah, they have and quite a list of libraries. There's libsodium, which is the portable packageable NaCl library, and they got, no matter what language you're using, you can get a version of it, whether it's PHP or Objective-C or Node.js or Lua or Java or whatever. So if you want Cha-Cha, you can get it.
So it looks like also Google's fork of OpenSSL and LibreSSL have upcoming implementations of Cha-Cha 20 as well, while vanilla OpenSSL does not. So +1 for the new forks.
Yep.
So it says, TJ has a note here, though. Unfortunately, the article has one mistake. FreeBSD does not use it. We still use the RC4 algorithm. So
there's a patch to fix that. That was sent in by, I think it was Ted Unext, actually.
Okay. Well, hopefully that gets
that was
submitted here shortly.
Being, looked at.
Cool. Okay, next up, some news from BSD Magazine. The June 2014 issue is out. Of course, we'll have the link in the show notes, so you can go click it and grab it afterwards. It's the monthly online BSD magazine, and of course, it's a digital download, so you can grab that and read it on anything that'll display PDFs. So this one includes several articles, such as TLS hardening, setting up a package cluster, Midnight BSD. We got some more GIMP tutorials, saving times and headaches when using the robot framework for testing, and an interview and an article about the increasing number of security vulnerabilities. Yep. So that's interesting. Do you know who wrote that article about the security vulnerabilities? Just
which one?
Through here, it looks like the security vulnerabilities one.
I don't see it on the...
Yeah, I don't see it on their list. Maybe it's
buried
deep
somewhere.
in the PDF somewhere. Yep. But cool. Again, the free PDF's available for download. So go hit up the link and grab a copy of it. Okay, I guess that's our weekly news this week. But before we go to our interview in a little bit, we do want to mention, of course, the sponsor for this week. Of course, IX Systems again. And they've been up to some new stuff. I know we've, seems like every week we're announcing a new FreeNAS release that they have out.
Release candidate 2 for 9.2.1.6.
Okay. Let me just bring that up here. So what have they fixed / changed?
Every bug that's been found in 9216 RC was fixed in RC2. They updated Samba and Metatalk again.
419.
So they updated Samba from 418 to 419 in the second release candidate. Applied the security fixes for file and libmagic and so on that came up for FreeBSD recently. And some other stuff. And so currently there are no known bugs. So please test and find more bugs.
Sweet. Yeah, and if nothing major is found, they're hoping to release 9.2.1.6 in about 2 weeks. So definitely grab that and give it a shake, see how it works for you. And if there's any problems, of course, let them know. It looks like we have a new YouTube video from IX this week as well, talking about FreeNAS and the BitTorrent Sync plugin. I guess BT Sync. So it kind of walks you through the initial configuration of FreeNAS and how to use the BitTorrent Sync plugin. So you'll want to check that out if you're using your FreeNAS box for more than just serving files. You want to serve a little torrents on there as well. But of course, these are just some of the weekly news headlines from IX Systems. But Yeah, they're still doing the same stuff they've been doing before. If you
Exactly.
need a box built, they will hook you up.
Yeah,
And
whether it's a little
actually, with
FreeNAS for under your TV
yeah,
or a giant 750 terabyte monster for the data center.
hmm and everything in
Hmm.
between. So that's the best part. You talk to their sales guys; they will figure out what you're trying to do, so you guys can work together on solving the problem instead of just throwing an off-the-shelf box at it and hoping it has enough horsepower or enough this or
Yep.
that. Let's try and get something specific to what you need for your particular
And yeah, that's
circumstances.
the great thing is that they kind of have that combination of they're not selling you something that's already sitting there waiting to be sold, and so trying to
Hmm
shoehorn your needs into something they already have sitting around. But they don't take a long time in order to custom build something for you either. Uh, you know, you can order something and you can have it pretty quick. Uh, and a good chunk of the time it takes is the burn-in testing they do. They
Sure.
run the hardware for a couple of days in their lab and pound on it and make sure that if anything's going to fail, it will fail in their lab and they
hmm
can fix it or replace the component before they ship it to you. So when you get it and put
Definitely.
it to work, you know it's going to just work and that you're not going to have any problems.
And that's invaluable, especially
Well,
if you're
yes.
having to ship it long distance or if you're not even at the location where
Well,
they're
and
shipping it
that's
to.
the
And
other thing is they can do configuration for you as well. You
hmm
get this worksheet. You can fill out how you want it installed and partitioned, what BIOS settings you want, and that. And because I did that, I had them ship a server directly to a data center in the States for me, so I didn't have to bring it to my house first, set it up, install what I wanted, and whatever. They set it up the way I specified in the document and shipped it to the data center. The data center knew, plugged the network into this port,
Yep.
and it was good to go.
Yeah, just fired it up and you were set. I
Exactly.
mean, that's just invaluable having that hands-on, and it's done by a tech who knows what they're
Yes.
doing too. If you're using BSD at all, I mean, they have so many committers on staff there now. I
Exactly.
mean, oh, let's take a look at that for you and see if I could fix that in the code. Oh, yes, there you go,
Yeah,
done.
it's like, so when I'm doing multipath, I have to, if I want to, make the secondary one the primary for half the drives, I have to do that manually every
hmm
time I boot up. I'm like, I wonder if we could, store something in the metadata to make it know that, you know, do the secondary as the primary
Sure,
and
sure.
stuff like that.
But of course, the same as previous weeks, the URL is still the same, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. Go ahead and check that out, fill out the info, get in touch with the guys there, let them know that we sent you. And of
Hmm.
course, when you fill that info out, you'll be able to download their free guide on things you need to look for in a vendor when you're purchasing a new server for open source. Some of the business cases maybe you need to make for management, so you
Yep.
can show them this is why we need to go to these guys. They know what they're doing when it comes to their software and their hardware.
Exactly.
So cool. Okay. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay. We're joined today by Craig Rodrigues of the FreeBSD project, who's here to tell us a little bit about what he does on the project and talk about some cool stuff with Jenkins and whatnot. But good to have you with us, of course, Craig.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yes. Thank you.
Great. So, get us started. Give us a little bit about yourself. How did you first get into BSDs? What led you to this point?
Well, I guess I can talk about how I first got into Unix and then BSD.
Yep.
I'm originally from Toronto, Canada,
Mhm.
and when I was in school, in high school, my school used computers that were designed for the Ontario government, and they ran a special software on it, but the actual operating system was Unix.
Hmm.
And so the software that was running was basically all menus and stuff. But one of the programs had a bug and it dropped you into a shell. And so I didn't know what that was, but that was my first intro to Unix. And then when I went to university later on at the U of Toronto, I was exposed to Unixes like IRIX, SunOS, and things like that. And after graduating, I worked in multiple .coms in the Web 1.0 days and got exposed to Solaris, Digital Unix, things like that. And where I got into BSD was about maybe 9 years ago when I was doing my master's degree in Boston, and I had to run a special I had to use a special ATM network card. And for whatever reason, the drivers for this card were actually better under FreeBSD than Linux.
Mm-hmm.
So I had been using Linux for many years, probably from the late 90s to early 2000s. And I installed FreeBSD to specifically use this ATM card. And after that, I found I really liked FreeBSD because everything was put together very well. Documentation was, with the FreeBSD handbook, it was consistent with
Mm-hmm.
the code and what you installed from the CD versus Linux, where you would have a distribution and the man pages were maintained by one project, and the code, the kernel was maintained by another project, and the userland was maintained by another project. And so I just liked that and started using that on my home. And I started working at different companies that use BSD. I worked at Avid Technology in the Boston area, and they had a video server that was based on FreeBSD. It was acquired from a company called Pluto Technologies that
Mm-hmm.
developed software in the 90s. And while at Avid, I worked with Alexander Kabayev, who is Can at freebsd.org, and I submitted a bunch of patches, patch after patch, and then I got a commit bit. David Schultz was my mentor. And then I worked at Avid for 4 years. I moved to California, worked at Juniper Networks for 5 years, and did a lot of BSD related stuff. And now I'm at IX Systems working on FreeNAS. And so the past 3 jobs I've had have been BSD related, which is kind of nice. So that's kind of my story about how I got into BSD and FreeBSD.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I guess you kind of already explained how you became a developer, basically sending patches until they yelled at you and gave you a commit bit, right?
They punished you with a bit.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. I mean, Alexander Kabayev, who was a committer, and I was just submitting a lot of patches. There was something called the C99 and POSIX conformance project, and I think Mike Barcroft, who I don't think he's active anymore, he was kind of leading that. So I submitted a lot of patches for that. So making sure that some header files and things like that conform to, some of the standards out there, and just submitting random patches. That's basically how it works. When you submit patches and you get a track record and people are comfortable with you submitting code, then there's a good chance that you'll get sponsored for a commit bit.
Mm-hmm.
So now, what are your current roles at the FreeBSD project?
So basically, my main job is FreeNAS at IX Systems. So a lot of what I'm doing is taking stuff from FreeNAS, pushing things into FreeBSD, because FreeNAS users exercise a lot of the FreeBSD code in ways that people who just download FreeBSD may not exercise. So there are some good fixes coming from FreeNAS. Being able to push that into FreeBSD is good. It helps FreeBSD, and it helps FreeNAS, because as FreeBSD moves forward, it makes it easier for FreeNAS to track FreeBSD.
Mm-hmm.
So while kind of doing a lot of infrastructure work at IX, like putting together their bug tracker, daily builds, and stuff like that, I found that in the past, for doing daily builds and smoke tests and things like that, a lot of companies write their own scripts and have written their own scripts to do that. But these days, what I've found is that the state-of-the-art that is available in off-the-shelf open source solutions, especially coming from the Linux world, it's very, very sophisticated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to set up a daily build system for FreeNAS. And I was going to evaluate Jenkins and BuildBot. And I downloaded, installed Jenkins, and within 15 minutes I had, an automated build system that checked out code from Git, built things, reported build breaks via emails, and it was so easy to set up that I never bothered to evaluate BuildBot because I don't have time.
Right.
Yeah, I already solved that problem.
Right. So then I said, well, this is kind of nice. So I saw a lot of complaints about the existing FreeBSD Tinderbox, which it's good stuff, but it was written about 15 years ago. And, there's more features and stuff that could be added to it. But my feeling is if state of the art and something else is better than what you've got, then just go with that other thing. And I said, well, I don't want to replace the Tinderbox because, some people still use it, but why don't I set up Jenkins in the FreeBSD cluster and see how it works out and see if people like it. And, and so that's what I did. So I worked with a few people, Steve Wills, Steve Kreutzer, Liwen Su, and we have a team that administers the Jenkins setup in the FreeBSD cluster. And we just set up, if you go to jenkins.freebsd.org, you can see what we've done. And we're doing like really simple stuff. We're just checking out a couple of branches and just building the AMD64 build world and not even doing make universe, not doing all the different architectures, just very simple stuff. And that seems to have been okay so far. I mean, the people that have responded have responded very favorably. So that seems to have worked out. And getting that to work required help from the FreeBSD cluster admin team because they had to allocate the hardware, make sure that the network was set up, and then for authentication, the Jenkins user interface is a web user interface. So if you want to administer it, you go through the web. If you want to look at the state of builds, you go through the web. And so if you go to jenkins.freebsd.org, you see the view of what a regular user can see, which is just the state of the builds. But if you try to log in, then you can administer the Jenkins itself. And in order to log in, we had to configure LDAP to interface with the LDAP config that the FreeBSD cluster administration team has set up. So basically, if you are a FreeBSD committer, there's some information in the committer's guide which tells you how you can set up a LDAP password, which is used by the LDAP Kerberos setup for certain web services used in the FreeBSD cluster. So that's things like Jenkins, the Bugzilla, the new code review system, which I forget the name of that's been set up.
QA, isn't it?
No. The code
Fabricator.
Fabricator, right. So there was a lot of plumbing that had to be set up because what a lot of people don't realize is there are a lot of machines administered by the FreeBSD cluster admin team that do all sorts of things, from serving the www.freebsd.org website, things like Fabricator and crazy things like CTM upgrades and CV sub servers. And So there's a lot of servers, and
Yep.
a lot of times people come into the project, they set something up, and then they move on, and the cluster admin team has to kind of take care of things going. So it's very important to work with them and make sure, because they have to deal with things like security and things like that. The servers we set up are in the Yahoo. So the cluster admin team, they have machines primarily at Yahoo, ISC, and NYI. And so the stuff that we set up is in Yahoo, and we had to work and make sure that the network and security met the requirements of Yahoo. So that was mostly working with Sean Bruno. And so, just getting all this stuff set up, it was an interesting experience, an interesting learning exercise. What I've been trying to do is on the FreeBSD wiki, there's a wiki.freebsd.org/Jenkins. And what I've tried to do is to put like status items, to say this is what we've done, this is its open pending item, or finished, and things like that. Basically, to be transparent to the FreeBSD community, because a lot of people, they're interested to know what's going on and interested to help, but they need to know what's going on and where they can help. And sometimes in the FreeBSD project, there have been huge initiatives where someone will say, I am going to do something, and then you don't hear from them for months at a time. And then so you don't know, is this being done? Is it delayed? What are the blocking items? Whatever. And so just doing all that, and I found that there are a lot of people that are interested in helping out. You get a lot of goodwill and good people to help that way.
Cool. Well, you kind of touched on this already, but give a little overview about what exactly Jenkins is and QA and how they relate to one another.
Okay, so I'll take one item at a time. So Jenkins is a framework. It was originally written at Sun Microsystems. And it was originally called Hudson. And then after Oracle bought Sun, there was a lot of drama associated with that. And Hudson was originally open source, and then then Oracle did what Oracle does, and the project forked and became Jenkins. And the original author of Jenkins left Oracle and works at a company called CloudBees that does a lot of Jenkins consulting. But basically what Jenkins is, it's a framework for what is called continuous integration. So when you are doing software development, you need to do a bunch of things. So a developer will work on some code, they will check it into a code repository. And so you need to make sure, does this code build? And if after it builds, does this code pass some kind of testing? And so every big software company has this kind of stuff, and most of them implement this on their own. They write scripts and things like that, do all that. And so what Jenkins does is it takes the best practices that for doing all those things, and it provides a easy to use and easy to set up web-based system. So you can set up a Jenkins to check out code from Git or Subversion, build it, report any build errors, email people. You can have IRC integration so that if the build fails, it sends a notification to a bot on IRC. And the thing that makes Jenkins very popular is that it's easy to set up, but it has an architecture of plugins which you can download and extend the functionality. So functions that are not in the base Jenkins system can be added through through plugins. So the past week, I've been looking at a plugin called libvirt, which interfaces with the libvirt library, so you can spawn virtual machines on demand for build jobs. Or there's plugins for things like Selenium. If you have a web application, you can hook in Selenium tests to Jenkins jobs. So there's about 700 plugins to Jenkins. It's a very vibrant community. And so I said, do I feel like writing stuff like this myself, or do I want to piggyback off something that is popular? And I said, let's do that. And I think what I want to see more from FreeBSD is FreeBSD adopting more best practices used by other software projects and companies. And because my perspective living in California and Silicon Valley, FreeBSD is perceived as also ran by a lot of people, especially in the DevOps community. People just don't feel that, well, all the latest stuff and best practices work well on FreeBSD. And in many respects, I think they're wrong, but I think in some respects, they are right. Because if you want to set up very sophisticated DevOps workflows, with Jenkins and Ruby and Puppet and all that kind of stuff, it's just easier. It's easier on Linux because there's more people who are familiar with it and with recipes to write. And so I think that's something we can improve in the FreeBSD community. Like one issue I had, Jenkins is written in Java.
Sure.
And it actually works fine under FreeBSD, but I set up multiple Jenkins jobs, one on a FreeBSD 9.2 release VM, and another on a 10.0 release VM. And in FreeBSD 9.2 release, there was a bug in the FreeBSD kernel virtual memory subsystem. So if you started a Java program, the kernel would core dump. And so I was like, what? I'm like not running any kernel code, but I start a Java program and the kernel core dumps. That's unfortunate. So there was a patch release that I think 9.2p3 that fixed that. Then in 10.0 release, if I started Jenkins, the Java binary would core dump. And I was like, well, that's unfortunate. And it turned out to be another bug in the FreeBSD virtual memory subsystem, because in 10.0 release, there's a feature called PCI ID, which is certain Intel CPUs. And in 10.0 release, there were some changes in the FreeBSD kernel VM to take advantage of that feature. But that was buggy and caused certain programs to core dump randomly, such as Java. So that was fixed.
Like yesterday.
Actually, the fix was
just got pushed out.
So what I'm saying is that, let's say you're in a company and you want to use FreeBSD and you're not familiar with the kernel and you don't really care and you don't have patience and you just want to set up Jenkins and have things go. Like, this kind of stuff is a deal breaker. People will say, what is this? Let's scrap FreeBSD and go to Linux. So that's why I'm trying to push these kinds of things in the FreeBSD project itself. Because if we use these tools, we'll make sure that these tools work well on FreeBSD. And then we can highlight this to people and say, this is how you can set up a good DevOps workflow in FreeBSD. And I've had a lot of people ask me, hey, the stuff you're doing with Jenkins is pretty cool. I didn't even know it worked on FreeBSD. How can I do it? So that kind of describes Jenkins.
How about QA?
So QA is a project that was started by, it's a software that was written by Julio Marino,
Mm-hmm.
who was, and he wrote it for, it's a successor to the ATF automated test framework. And he wrote it as a Google Summer of Code project for NetBSD first. Kind of developed ATF and then QA in the NetBSD project.
Sure.
But he ended up importing his stuff into FreeBSD. And so what QA is, you can think of it, it's an engine for running tests. And it runs the tests, and then it records the results of the test, and then it has a reporting engine, so you can see the results of the test.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty good. It has been imported into FreeBSD, and in the past 2 weeks, there's an option called MK_test, which was enabled so that if you do a build world and install world, it installs all the QA tests under the user/tests directory. Yep. And if you're using an older version, you have to enable MK_test in source.conf. So the idea is that in the FreeBSD source tree, there are unit tests that can be run under ATF or QA. And by having the tests in the tree, that will ensure that tests don't get stale. Because I've seen this in other jobs. If you have unit tests that are maintained outside of the source code, as the source code changes and the developers make changes, they don't update the tests, and then the tests break.
Right.
And then if tests break all the time, then people say, well, these tests are useless, so then they don't run the tests at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've actually seen that happen multiple times.
Yeah.
So actually, the stuff that Julio is doing is very, very cool. It's being used by a couple of companies. Isilon is using it. Juniper is using it. So I said, this is cool stuff. So if we could hook this into Jenkins, then that would be very, very useful, because we could put together a workflow where we can check out the code, build it, and then run some kind of tests, and then report the output of the test. So at BSDCan, I talked with Julio, and I said, if you could modify QA so that right now your reporting engine can generate output in plain text or in HTML. If you can add reporting output format so that it records the output in an XML format called JUnit. JUnit XML is a native test format that Jenkins uses and a lot of other test frameworks. So I said, if you can generate the test output in this format, it can be imported into Jenkins directly. So if you go to jenkins.freebsd.org, if you look at one of the jobs, I think there's something called test or something like that. Mm-hmm. You can see that the output of the different QA tests reported in the native Jenkins test result viewer. And so what Julio did is he actually implemented something in QA where it can report the test output format in JUnit XML. And so he has checked that into his Git repository. He hasn't made a release of it. So if you install QA from ports, you will not have this code.
Mm-hmm.
but I hope that Julio sort of makes a release with this so that we can have more people install Kua from ports and try this out and test this out. So that's basically what Kua is. I'm not an expert on Kua. I'm still learning it. But for something that came out of Summer of Code, it's pretty awesome.
It's pretty useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess what it kind of is, Jenkins is doing the build testing, and then Kua is actually doing the runtime test. Does this actually do what it's supposed to do? So that, well, Jenkins can find a build error this way. We can find, when that change made this thing over here break, right?
Yeah, that's the idea. So, I mean, the only way that this kind of stuff works is that you have to run tests regularly, and you have to run them in a way where people can see the results. Because if you run the tests once every 6 months and then something breaks, you don't know like what broke, what happened in the past 6 months to break the test. And so that's why it's called continuous integration. You have to continuously build and test. And so we're not 100% there yet. We're laying the foundation for putting these things together. And I mean, in the past, people have tried to do stuff, but for various reasons, they didn't finish. So I mean, the person who came the closest to doing something really cool was Chris Kenaway, who in the FreeBSD 7 timeframe did some pretty awesome stuff with. He had a bunch of Perl scripts that ran various tests for doing things like, I think it ran a benchmark, a MySQL benchmark called SuperSmack, and he used that for profiling a lot of the SMP improvements that went into FreeBSD 7, and also some of the scheduling work that was done in the FreeBSD 7 timeframe. So just by doing that regularly and reporting the results, that fed to the kernel developers who use that to improve things and fix bugs. And then sort of Chris, became less active in the project, and kind of that effort kind of withered. So I hope to use things that are off the shelf and kind of go behind efforts that already have momentum, like Kua, so that other people can come and take this on and maintain it over time. Because I don't want to do this forever. It's a lot of work.
Yeah,
for sure. So who's involved with all this testing system, and what does everyone specifically do?
So right now we have
besides yourself, of course.
we have the people who administer the Jenkins cluster itself. There's me, Li Wen Su, who is also the port maintainer for Jenkins. So Jenkins is in ports. Steve Wills, he's also the port maintainer for another Jenkins port, which is Jenkins LTS, which is like a stable version of Jenkins. And Steve Wills has also been doing a lot of work to set up Jenkins builds for the ports team. So having a Jenkins build that runs Poudre for ports commits and reporting errors. He's been doing a lot of work to set that up. And and then Steve Kreutzer has been helping out in terms of setting things up. In terms of the testing stuff, that's been mostly Julio. So he's working on the Kua side. And so that's about it. There's a mail alias called FreeBSD-testing at freebsd.org. I encourage people who are interested in this stuff to join that alias and ask questions and help out. The thing that I've been looking at in the past week is integration with libvirt. So libvirt is, if you go to libvirt.org, it's an API for starting and stopping and virtual machines from different hypervisors like Zen, KVM, QEMU, and someone in the FreeBSD community, Roman Bogdarovsky, novel at FreeBSD.org, he's actually made changes to libvirt to support vhive, and he's been upstreaming his changes to libvirt.org, which is very good. So I've been trying to figure out how all that fits together and works, and see if I can do things like in Jenkins spawn VMs to run builds and or spawn VMs to run tests, and that's a lot of work because I'm learning libvirt and some of the things don't work out of the box with vhive, and but I'm getting some good help from Roman on that, because at the end of the day, if we can show that we can put together a very sophisticated workflow using Jenkins, QA, and vhive for building and testing FreeBSD and showing people this is how you can do things and you can set this up in your own environment, I think that would be a huge thing, because in many companies people are setting up these workflows using Linux-based things like Jenkins, KVM, libvirt, Selenium, things like that. So if we can show people that in the BSD community we have equivalent ways of doing things, and it's out of the box and very easy to set up, I think it's good for FreeBSD itself, but also for promoting FreeBSD in companies.
So why do you think we need this kind of infrastructure, and what is the goal of having the automated testing with all this stuff?
So I think that one of the other hats I wear, I also joined the FreeBSD release engineering team last year, and so in any software company, when you have a software release, the software release is more than just doing compiling the image and then putting it on an FTP site. Any release process has to involve some amount of testing. So because the FreeBSD project is not a company and it's an open source project, the testing that goes on is best effort and goodwill from the community. So that only gets you so far. If we want to raise the bar and say FreeBSD is as good as something as Linux or Mac OS or whatever, we need to do more, and we need to do better. Because I pointed out two problems right now where I encountered bugs in the virtual memory subsystem just by running Java. I wasn't even doing any fancy stuff.
Yeah, it seems like that could have been caught earlier.
Sure.
So, but the thing is, it's very hard because a lot of people who are involved in open source projects, they're not interested in testing. It's boring to them. They would rather hack on a feature or whatever and, and move on. And that's fine. It's just how it is. So I'm not going to say we're going to be as good as, a company with, 100 people working on testing. But if we can do better, then why not? And if we can use off-the-shelf stuff that is used in other projects and other companies, then, why not? And I think it will help. It will help the FreeBSD releases be better.
Cool. Can you give us maybe a specific example of a test that's in place, something that would get run?
So right now we don't have any tests of any significance hooked up, but if you in FreeBSD current, if you build and do an install world under the user tests directory, look at different. You can look at different unit tests that have been implemented. So some of the tests in there are kind of simple. So they do things like do a ls and make sure that the output is correct and the command line options work and that kind of thing.
Sure.
And I think Alan looked at the test results and sent me an email saying something like, I forget if one
of the tests was checking one of the file system flags. I think it was user immutable, and that isn't implemented on top of ZFS. So when the tests are run on top of ZFS, that test fails.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
So there's things like that. So I think that by using these things, if we raise awareness in the FreeBSD community about QA, then I think the idea is that FreeBSD developers can write tests as they are adding to the source code in FreeBSD, and then these will be available for running. So that's a bigger job because encouraging developers who are very familiar about certain area like networking or whatever to write tests. I mean, I've seen in companies it's hard to do that. So the open source community, it's hard. And then to find people in the open source community who are interested in testing and automation and things like that. There are some people that are interested in it, but not a lot. But if there are people out there who are interested in pitching in and joining the effort, I would encourage them to join the FreeBSD-testing list and, ask where you can help. So, I mean, we could definitely use help with like scripting. So people who are familiar with, Python, Ruby, expect, any automation kind of scripting experience is helpful. Anyone familiar with DevOps kind of things for provisioning machines and provisioning VMs. People familiar with Libvirt. If you're interested, join the list and let us know that you're around, because I think that the more people who are involved, it will improve things overall. And you have to be interested in this to some extent. Otherwise, you'll find something else to do. Yep. So I find it interesting to put all these things together and have it work under FreeBSD. I think it's pretty cool.
So I guess most of what we talked about is really for the base system, and I guess you touched on a little bit about, how hard is this going to be to do for the ports infrastructure as well?
So for the ports infrastructure, I'm less familiar with how that all works. The ports team has very sophisticated workflows for making sure that ports build. So there's a system called Red Ports. Yep. So if you're a ports committer, you can actually submit a port to Red Ports, and then Red Ports will build it, and it'll tell you, did the port build or not? What were the errors? So that way you can test things out before actually committing it to the FreeBSD ports tree.
Right, and it does like every supported version on i286 and AMD 64 and stuff like that. Right.
So they already have a lot of sophisticated things in place. But Steve Willis has been kind of saying if we can kind of figure out how to use Jenkins in the mix, that might be a useful thing to add to the ports arsenal for testing. So I'm not I use ports, and I think ports are like an amazing part of FreeBSD. It's what makes the FreeBSD system useful for doing, anything more than just logging in and getting a shell file. So, and a lot of the stuff I'm using is from ports. The Jenkins software is in ports. libvirt is in ports. Python is in ports. I mean, to do anything useful in FreeBSD, you need ports. And ports are hugely important for FreeBSD. So whatever the ports team decides is the best way to move, I'm behind it, but I'm focusing more on Jenkins for source itself.
Right. Mm-hmm. We'll have to ask Steve about ports.
There you go.
Yeah, definitely. He was at BSD Camp, so there was I had a little working group on Jenkins, and the ports had a working group, but it was at the same time. Yeah. So I couldn't go to the other one, and Steve went to the ports one, and he didn't go to the Jenkins one. So I heard there were a lot of discussions about Jenkins in that working group, but since I wasn't there, I don't know, all the stuff. But I think it's good that we're using similar technologies and we can help each other out, because it's not like you do this and we do that, and if we use similar things and can share scripts, we help everyone else out and make everything better for FreeBSD.
Yep.
Sure. So I know you mentioned when you were looking at Jenkins, looking back at Tinderbox and stuff, was there one or two super critical features that Jenkins just did better that, compared maybe to how Tinderbox didn't do it, or something you'd like to highlight on that?
So, I mean, just two things without installing any Jenkins plugins at all.
Mm-hmm.
Two features that I liked were if Jenkins did a checkout in a build and there was a build break, then Jenkins emails all the people that committed since the last successful build.
Okay.
That was a useful feature.
Yeah, it's kind of better at identifying who's
very small to blame
set of commits, which one of these very small set of commits is what broke it, rather than just saying, hey, it's broken, somebody should figure out why.
Right. So actually, when I was at Juniper Networks, I wrote code that did something like that, where if there was a build break, it looked at all the commits since, I didn't even do since the last successful build. I did in the past 24 hours, and then I emailed all the people. And it's so simple, but it's useful. And I was like, this could be added to the Tinderbox. But I mean, if I can do package install Jenkins and get something that works out of the box right away, then, I mean, I'm not invested in the Tinderbox, so I don't really care.
Right.
So. And then, all the other stuff that is in there, like integration with Git, integration with Subversion, IRC integration, and, so
yep.
Yeah, that was basically very simple thing for me.
Cool. So is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we let you go?
No, just that even though I've been doing a lot of stuff, we could definitely use more help. So join the FreeBSD testing list and see if you're interested. See where you can help out, because we can definitely use more people, and we don't need you to be kernel developer. If you have scripting experience in different things and are interested in helping improve FreeBSD, then definitely join us and help us out.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for being on the show with us today, Craig.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next up, we're going to be going to our weekly news roundup. But really quick, of course, we want to mention our other sponsor of this show, and that's, of course, Tarsnap. And that URL is tarsnap.com/BSD Now. Now, why should we consider Tarsnap, Alan?
Because everybody needs online backup. That's See? You can't get away without having a backup. You definitely need a backup.
Well, I'll qualify that. You need online backup you can
Yes.
trust, because sometimes maybe backup's worse to have where you're just letting your information flow out there and anybody can grab it or snag it, or any organization that has access
Yes.
to that box. Do you really trust people with your
I remember,
data?
I think it was the very first episode, or maybe the second episode of my first podcast, TechSnap. Um, we were talking about Dropbox, and they're like, "Yes, we encrypt everything with our one key that we have." And so yeah, if someone breaks in, but then it turned out that they were finding anybody who had certain MP3 files or video files in their account and suspending the accounts because they were getting DMCA takedown notices from movie studios or whatever. And it's like, right.
Not so much, huh?
With Tarsnap, you don't have to worry about any of that because the files are encrypted with your key that only you have. So Colin doesn't promise that he won't play with your files, but it's just technically impossible for him to access your files.
Yeah. I mean, he's a trustworthy guy. I would trust him, but it's nice that I don't even have to.
On his blog, he has an article. It's like, why you should assume I'm a spy.
Yeah, I mean, this is all being hosted in the NSA data center, right?
Colin is saying
it wouldn't matter.
Colin is saying you don't trust me because you don't have to. You can. This is just done technically correctly, and so you don't have to worry about trusting me. You just have to trust the crypto, and the code's there, and you can read it if you want it.
Definitely.
And if you find a bug, there's a bug bounty.
Real easy to get started too. Yeah, bug bounty too. So he's challenging people. Find a way to break this, and if you can, we will reward you. But really cool, real easy to get started with Tarsnap. He's got clients for pretty much everything under the sun. I think even Sigwin for Windows. So that's pretty cool. And it's, of course, cheap. You only need to put down an initial $5 deposit. And depending on your usage, I mean, it's pretty stinking cheap. That $5 may last you a long time if you're just backing up some
it's only 25 cents a gigabyte. So if you only had a couple gigabytes, that's 50 cents a month. And then because it has, Colin wrote a nice algorithm that finds the differences between your files. You only have to upload the differences, not everything. And he gave a good talk at EuroBSDCon about how it works and how by using the dynamic block sizes like he does, it finds the smallest amount of change that there is. Whereas if you used a fixed block, it would probably find twice as many changes and you'd have to upload that much more data.
Waste a lot of space. Yep. Well, very cool. So again, that URL, tarsnap.com/BSD Now. Let him know that we sent you, and you heard it here on BSD Now. Okay, first up in our weekly news roundup, we have an article from, again, a person who's been on this show, Ted Uangst, talking about pre-authenticated decryption considered harmful. Ooh, that sounds scary. So what's going on with that?
So AGL, who, if I'm not incorrect, is, that's the... he works at Google on the security team, and he's the guy that posted about boring SSL. So he's like the lead on that project, and he's wrote about dealing with encrypted streams and so on. And so Ted was reading that and reflecting on how that applies to tools he's written, like the Signify system for OpenBSD. And so it says Signify will only verify a message if it's entirely correct. The OpenBSD installer doesn't stream install files through tar anymore. This was something we needed to change precisely because of the situation Adam is warning about in his blog post. Right. So instead, the full tar file is downloaded, verified, and only then extracted instead of being passed through. Tainted data never hits the real file system. And then package add, which is the OpenBSD binary package system, combined with Signify will work a little differently. Instead, checking the checksum of each file, but the tainted data is first saved to a temporary file before being renamed only if it's correct. It is unfortunately possible to install a partial package by truncating the TGZ file.
Interesting.
And then he talks about another tool called REOP, which is True Encryption at Rest tool. Does this one sentence repeat the mistakes of 20 years ago? Each message is encrypted as a single large packet. However, the entire message must be decrypted and authenticate successfully before any output is produced. So it's actually safer than a small packet streaming program which would produce a partial output.
That's interesting. So I guess it says it cheats a little bit by imposing a message size limit as well. It simply can't encrypt large files for large values of large.
Yeah.
For whatever size that
basically, large files back when it was written was like, oh, any file that big, nobody's going to have a file that big. And now it's like, all my files are that big.
Yeah, right? Oh, cool. Interesting article.
And, by, influence or by tangent, you can read about... you can read Adam's article where he's actually talking about using GPG and decrypting a tar file and piping that output directly into tar, and why that may or may not work, and what the drawbacks are.
Yeah, I guess one of the drawbacks of doing it this way is it takes a little extra disk space because having to download the compressed version first from the web, verify it and then extract it. But still, in today's day and age, that's not usually a big deal. Plenty of disk space. Cool. Okay, next up, FreeBSD 9.3 RC2 is out. It has hit. So I guess a release is getting a lot closer. RC2 is out and ready for testing. Since the last one, though, there's been a couple fixes in this. It's got some fixes for NIC drivers, the latest file, and of course libmagic security updates that went out recently.
Improvements to
and some serial
the 10 gigabit Ethernet controller, the CXGBE, which I'm pretty sure is the one that Netflix uses.
Yeah, we want that fixed. But it looks like even BSD config has been updated to support some package format changes, bugs, BSD grep. Let's see, workaround for serial ports on certain motherboards, specifically the Intel D2500CCE board. Let's see, firmware for CXGBE Chelseo T4 and T5 cars has been updated. And that looks like about
and the rest is
for
the instructions for upgrading from different versions.
Cool. So if you're still on the 9 branch and you're awaiting this, go ahead and grab RC2 now. It sounds pretty solid. Start testing it out and let them know if you find anything, of course, as soon as possible.
So they can get that fixed before it actually gets released.
Before we hit release. Yep. Cool. Also, lesser known fact that TJ put a note on here is that there are some pre-made virtual machine images.
They have
this is
QCOW2, VHD, which is for VirtualBox, and VMDK, which is for your VMware. Plus the raw disk image, which is just, there's no copy on write functionality or anything like that. No formatting, it's just the raw disk image. Those are the best for Beehive currently because we don't have a VMDK backend yet. And you can get all the stuff you need.
Cool. Okay, next up, we have a wrap-up from Package SourceCon 2014. Oh, that's neat.
Yes.
Put on by, looks like a lot of NetBSD developers, but there was also some OS X and SmartOS folks there as well.
Package Source, because it's from NetBSD, is very focused on portability, and so it's actually very easy to use Package Source on other operating systems. You can even run Package Source on Linux.
So it looks like some of the talks that were given, we had a bulk tracker talk, which is a nice way to visualize bulk build statistics. There was a talk on Package Source Errors webpage, common things about that. A pretty tabular data without much effort talk. Let's see some OCaml packages, cross-compiling with QEMU.
That's how the FreeBSD ports guys are looking at trying to build ARM and MIPS stuff.
GCC fixes for Mac OS X and PowerPC and how they got 4.7 to build, how package installs and upgrades are handled on the NetBSD Foundation servers. Let's see, NetBSD thin client servers, and they have links to some of the papers on here, by the way, or some information. I don't see any, it doesn't look like the videos are available, though. But they had a talk about Package Source in the future. How do we make it easier for developers?
They're actually looking at replacing the make files with Lua scripts instead. Which is definitely an interesting approach. A lot of times, sometimes it does seem like we're trying to shoehorn all this stuff into Make to be able to do all the complicated things you need to do in the ports tree.
Sure. Let's see, moving away from CVS, some automatic testing of packages. Oh, that's cool. But it says there is a note here. The talks were recorded.
It says that last one was the only one that was recorded. Or sorry, the last one's the only one that was filmed. The rest were recorded, which I'm guessing means audio only.
Audio only. Okay. Well, still, we'll try and, of course, highlight that on a future show once they turn up on the interweb somewhere.
And they also, apparently, someone introduced the Save OS X project. and
interesting.
talking about how the documentation can be improved.
Oh, okay, cool.
And then they had a hackathon where they worked on a bunch of stuff, including getting package source to run on OS 10 Yosemite, bunch of other Save OS 10 stuff, working on the wiki, package testing, getting
XFCE getting ported,
getting
OS
stuff
10?
to work on a 12-inch G4 MacBook.
Mm-hmm. And then they have a section called drinks as well on who they had drinks with while they were there. Which you got to have that.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Next up in the news, we have some Postgres FreeBSD performance and scalability. We got, I guess, a very detailed PDF here.
Yes.
So, Alan, you already took a look through some of this. What was some of the notables? Cool.
Kib did some work on what could be done to make Postgres SQL faster on FreeBSD. So to start, he had a nice 40-core machine with a terabyte of RAM to run his benchmarks on.
Mm-hmm.
And he started playing with stuff and basically found by making a small patch to the kernel, he got his transactions per second to go from about 30-something thousand to 160,000 as he started using all those 40 threads or all the cores he had. Mm-hmm. And then once he topped out on that, the performance starts to drift down a little bit again, but still was much, much higher than what he got without the patch.
Oh, that's cool.
And you can see...
looks like he included the specific options you used too, so you can replicate that on your box.
And you can see that they effectively, after about 30 out of the 40 cores were saturated, that's when performance starts to fall off again.
Mm-hmm. Just looking at some of his results charts here. Got nice graphs.
And it looks where he actually found that part of the problem was calling set proc title a lot was causing lock contention with sysctl and actually so Postgres SQL updates the title of the connection handler when every new SQL command is received. So when you're doing that 156,000 times a second, that was a problem. And so by avoiding that, they improved a lot of performance.
Cool. Yeah, I like he's got the details on how to patch your system to duplicate what he did here, which options to set, which sysctls to set, and what options in your Postgres config to update as well. Pretty sweet. Well, you have to check that out. If you guys use Postgres at all, you may be interested in this. See if you can squeeze some extra performance out of your box. I mean, you may not be sitting on a 40 core with 1 terabyte of RAM, but I imagine some of this will apply to other systems.
Based on the note at the end here, he might have been using that machine IX Systems built for the foundation a little while ago. Remember the one with 40 cores and a terabyte of RAM? So it seems that might be, he was getting his time on that machine and getting to play with it.
See, they're already putting it to good use. Exactly. That's why they built that box. That's great. Cool. Well, that's the end of our weekly news roundup. We'll be back in just a moment with our next segment. Okay, we're back. It's time for feedback from you guys in the audience. So we'll get right into it. First up, we have James has a question about ZFS backups. So he says, "Hi chaps, you put on a great show and you've inspired me to play with FreeBSD. I've run into a problem that I'm struggling to solve. I'd like to make backups of which is on ZFS of a slash. But after testing this out in a VM first, he can't get the restore process that he thought would work quite right. So the way he's making backups is as follows, and some ZFS commands here. He's doing snapshots and then sending that over to, it looks like a pipe and then gzip file. Yep. And then he's destroying the backup. To restore, he's using the FreeBSD install CD, selecting live CD, and then he's making a temp ZFS directory. He's importing his ZFS pool, it looks like here, or datasets. And then he's reading back the gzip file and doing a ZFS receive on it. He says, the problem is at this stage, I'm always getting some kind of can't umount z root, blah, blah, blah device busy error, and no amount of prior ZFS umount seems to help. If you have any suggestions, I'd appreciate it. Yeah, we're not seeing the specific error message here, but is it, I assume it's mounted already?
Well, when he does the import, that'll be mounted. There's a flag on ZFS import to not mount anything. which I'm guessing what you want to do while you're using it. Although in general, nothing should be using those files when you import that pool, except for when you unmount it.
Well, I think receive, because the way we do ours on PCBSD is we do them all unmounted when we do the receives, and that seems to work fine. I've never run into this.
Normally want to have it unmounted because you're going to be overwriting the files, right? And so that doesn't work so well when it's mounted.
Correct. Let's see. Are any other thoughts you have on this one, Alan?
Just that there is a way when you import it to not mount any of the stuff. Minus capital N. Do not mount any file systems from the imported pool. So when you're mounting the one you want to restore onto, then if you do import with minus N, capital N, it will not mount any of those systems, and then you won't have the problem where they can't be unmounted because of the problem. The other issue is that depending how he's got the alt root in there, so it should be fine. But if it mounted something over top of slash or something, then you're standing on your foot when you're trying to unmount, right?
Sure. That makes sense.
But yeah, without seeing like ZFS list and NZPool list and the actual error messages and file systems, it's hard to tell exactly what's going on there.
Okay.
Next question.
Well, cool. Next question from Kleeman. I'll let you read this one out.
Hello, I'm an I2 student and I'd like to experience what it means to be part of a large project like FreeBSD. He says, there's a library that I'd like to use for his work, and I decided to be a good idea to make a port for FreeBSD and become the maintainer of it. The problem is that the library is already in the ports tree, but it's a few years old. It's a much older version, and apparently based on a fork from another project that is also defunct. The maintainer appears to be ports at freebsd.org, which I guess is a generic email for unmaintained ports, which, yes, it is.
Correct.
His question is, should I try to take over the current port and update it, or should make a new one? I replied to this privately saying it depends there. If the old version is useful for something, then you would make a new one. But if it's not, then you should update it.
Well, it sounds like if it's unmaintained, though, unmaintained and probably defunct, again, I don't know what the specific port is, then I would just grab maintainership of it.
Basically, either way, the process is the same. You make up a patch that either adds a new port or updates the old one, and you send it in via Bugzilla, and then some person with the ports commit bit will look at it and apply it to the tree, and then it'll be updated. You can... apply for...
it doesn't hurt.
You have to... there's the Porter's Handbook, which is like the FreeBSD Handbook, except for all about porting applications, and it talks about how to submit your first port, how to update a port, stuff like that. Also, you can use Poudriere to actually compile your modified port and make sure it works. And you could also consider signing up for Red Ports, which lets you... you send them your modified port, and they actually run it against FreeBSD 8, 9, 10, and 11 on i386 and AMD64 and lots of different combinations there, and make sure that, just because it works on your system, it's actually going to work on every version.
Well, don't forget, take a look at Portlint as well. That's a great utility you'll want to run just to make sure you get all your syntaxes right. And a lot of times it'll catch the boneheaded errors before you submit it.
Or even just nitpicky stuff like in your make file, stuff supposed to be in this order.
I always get caught by that one. Oh, there should be a space here, and then this should be in the next
the license has to go before that thing. But, having every make file be consistent like that makes it much easier. So, but Portlint and all that stuff is discussed in the Porter's Handbook, which is very valuable. And yes, there's BSD ports on EFNet or the mailing list if you need help. As I've done it before, I found people there to be very responsive to helping me. When I did the GD and SD port, I basically did it in a vacuum based on the handbook, but later on when I wanted to make it has support for an optional dependency. If you have libRCU, it can reload the config faster, and so I made that an option in the port, but I was having trouble getting it compiled correctly, and I got some help with, with stuff like that. Interactive help can often be the best way.
Definitely. And yeah, like I said, people are usually really responsive when it comes to ports too. There's lots of maintainers out there, and if it's just better to ask if you have a question, just to make sure you're doing it right instead of it, even before maybe you submit the PR, just because you can get it correct the first time and hopefully it'll get committed faster.
And it was great to meet some of the people that helped me in person at BSDCan.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Next up, a
PCBSD
we hope
question. That gets you started. Yep. Next, we have PCBSD question from John. So it's fairly long, so I'll go through the skinny of it. He says, "Hi guys," probably Chris mainly. He said he installed PCBSD a while back, but he finally got it working on his system. I guess he's got a triple boot with Windows 8, Ubuntu, and then another SSD for PCBSD. But he goes through a lot of what's going on here. He says he didn't check the box for BIOS UTC time during the install. But basically, the long and short of what's going on here is he's having a problem with boot environments. Because he's triple booted, it looks like, when he's booting into other operating systems, Windows or Ubuntu in this case, the time is being set differently on the box. Of course, connecting to NTP probably on those different platforms. And then when he boots into PCBSD, the time is being set differently again. And what's going on is when he's doing updates, it's creating boot environments that are all out of order now. So the default one that you normally boot up off of, unless there's a problem, is now getting shoved farther and farther down the list, because the system timestamps are all wrong when he boots up. So we actually discussed this offline, but the expected behavior should be you want consistent time. I mean, if your time is jumping around all over the place, you're going to run into issues like this. In this case, boot environments, I mean, it's getting the timestamps straight from ZFS, which is based on your system time.
So it seems that what happened was at one point he was booted with the time further in the future, and then when he rebooted and ran Windows or Linux or whatever, it set the time back to what the time actually was. And then we went to do rebooted PCBSD and did an update or whatever, and so it made a new snapshot that was newer but had an older date on it, and this confused things quite a bit. In general, though, doing another update shouldn't affect what your default boot environment is.
Well, it depends on when it was created, like how far off the time is. Because if all of a sudden the default boot environment shows as created newer,
right? But
then
your default
one, like it'll get shoved farther down the list.
The created date on your default one stays the same because it was created the longest ago, most likely.
Well, again, it just depends on how far off the time was.
I think part of the problem is he's misunderstanding what they're for, right? Because before when you install an update, before it does the update, it makes a snapshot.
Creates a boot environment. Yeah.
But you don't want to boot off that one because that one's undoes the update. No. You want to stay on, generally you stay on the same boot environment the entire time unless something's wrong.
So in his case, the original boot environment, the one he was first booted up off of, was getting shoved farther and farther down in the boot list, and it wasn't the default when he rebooted because of the timestamps being off.
Is it? Okay.
So that's what was happening. And
you can change
what
the default
in
the PC boot config, right? By
you can,
pressing the little
you
star
can change
button.
the default. You can, and you can go into like the grub settings and change the default there. But in this case, I think we just figured out it's probably best to get your system time right first, so you're not running the weird
specifically mentions he did not tick the my BIOS clock is in UTC, but I think that's how he wanted it. He wanted to leave it as my BIOS clock is local time because that's what Windows does.
Sure.
So I think maybe he misremembered and he did tick it.
That's possible. That's possible. And we sent over, we're chatting on email about this too, but we will figure out hopefully what it is and get back to you guys on the show. But if we can figure out the time issue, this problem goes away. Cool. Okay. Well, next up, we have something from Brad about ZFS and FreeNAS. He says, first off, love the show. You guys are the ones that have swayed me more towards BSD. Well, thank you, Brad. I have a FreeNAS server that I built from scratch for home backup and media serving using Plex. It has an 8-core AMD processor and 16 gigs of RAM at the moment. He's going to start using this to store and stream media to play Plex stuff on his TV. He says when he built it, he used 2 3-terabyte Western Digital Red mirrored and 2 2-terabyte Seagate drives mirrored, all combined into one pool. At the moment, I can fit everything into the 2-terabyte portion. Now he'd like to add a few more drives to be properly sized for the future. Is there some magical way to split my 3-terabyte mirror from the 2-terabyte mirror, leaving all the data on the 2-terabyte portion? Then when I set up a new pool with 3-terabyte drives, what setup would you recommend? RAID Z1, 2, 3, etc. He plans on not using the 2-terabyte drives or using them as a separate pool for time machine backups only. And with what setup would we suggest? Would it be future-proof to add more drives later? Hope I made the questions clear enough to keep up the good work.
Honestly, adding more sets of mirrors is the easiest way to be able to upgrade incrementally. If you use something like RAID Z 1 or 2 or whatever, you have to add drives in the bigger groups, right? Like if you're using RAID Z 1, you have to have at least 3 drives in a group. So if you want to add more space, you have to have at least that many drives. Whereas with mirrors, you can add drives 2 at a time, which is easier. So with his current setup of 1 pair of 3s and 1 pair of 2s, he can't actually just remove the pair of 2s currently. That's a feature they're working on, but it's not here yet. His options are A, if he gets, just say 2 new 3 terabyte drives, attach one of the new 3 terabyte drives to the mirror of the 2 terabyte drives, and then he can remove, let it sync, and then he can remove one of the 2 terabytes and add the second 3 terabyte, and then remove the other one, and now he'll have 2 mirrors each of 3 terabytes.
Yep.
Or if he wants to keep the 2 terabyte drives in there for now, he can just add 2 new 3 terabyte drives as another mirror set to the pool, and he can just keep doing that. But yeah, if he replaces one at a time the 2 terabyte drives with 3 terabyte drives, when that's done, it'll either auto expand or just by doing ZFS or zpool online -e, and then the device name, it will expand, and all of a sudden that free space will appear. Once the smallest drive in the mirror set is 3 terabytes instead of 2 terabytes, that extra 1 terabyte of usable space will just magically appear in the pool.
Come online, yeah.
So yeah, you can just either do zpool attach to add the drives, or you can do zpool replace. The difference is during replace, both drives are in use. With the attach, it's basically the attach is probably slightly safer, but it shouldn't make a difference. And you can do that. But yeah, you don't have to get rid of the 2 terabytes if you don't want. The only issue there is you get unbalanced LUNs. His 2 mirror sets won't have the same amount of free space, and so ZFS will bias the writes towards the one that has more free space. And that means that when you go to read that data, it'll be biased the same way. And so you won't get quite the same performance as if you were reading, the maximum speed off every drive. Instead, because you're biasing towards one drive. But, in a home media center, it's probably not your issue.
That may not be a big deal.
With my 6 3 terabyte Seagate drives in a RAID Z2, I can read 600 to 750 megabytes a second. My LAN can only do 125. And to be able to play the movie back on my TV, I need maybe 5 or 10 megabits. So
yeah, you're not hurting.
The little bit of unbalanced LUN there is, you're not running a database where you're trying to get every bit of performance out of it. So you're fine with just adding mirrors. It's the least space efficient is because you have the more wasted drives, but you get the best performance and it's easiest to expand.
Sure. Sounds like you got a nice system there, though.
Yep. If he wanted to replace it all, what he could do, depends how he sets it up. If he wanted to rebalance the LUNs or something, basically if he gets a pair of, he says he has less than 2 terabytes of data. So if he gets 2 drives off to the side, he could create a second pool and ZFS send all the data to that second pool and then recreate everything. Depending how, like if he wants to actually switch to a RAID Z. But if he does a RAID Z with, 4 or 5 or 6 drives or whatever, if he wants to add more space,
gotta do it in bigger
and
chunks.
So you have to have that many drives at once, and how many will fit in your chassis, and so on and so on. So mirrors are just the easiest way, especially for home. It's not the cheapest way, but that extra flexibility is probably worth it anyway.
Sure, it is. Makes the administration easier.
Basically, instead of buying as many drives right away, you can buy a couple fewer drives because you're doing in pairs, and then just be like, I'll save that money, and 6 months down the road, I can just buy 2 more drives and throw them in, and then 2 more drives and throw them in. And then, the great thing with ZFS is, so leave the 2 terabyte and the 3 terabyte in there and add 2 more 3 terabytes. And then down the road, you can replace those 2 terabyte drives with 2 more 3s or 2 4s or 2 6s if they're that big by then. And, you're just keep replacing the smallest drives with new bigger drives, and eventually your pools scales with you constantly.
Cool. Okay. Well, last up, we have Adam asking about getting into BSD. He says, I'm a longtime Linux user since the mid-90s. In the past year or so, I grew a large interest in OpenBSD, both from the users and developers' perspective. I've been developing software professionally for over a decade now and started programming in the mid-90s, mostly in Perl, some C, and then moving on to Ruby, Python, and many other languages along the way. I really want to get into OpenBSD development since several other core principles align really well with my line of thinking. Most notably, their approach to documentation, the release management process applied to the system, code reviews and do it well or don't do it all approach, and then it says many, many more. So my interest was greatly reinforced during the whole heartbeat issue, when everyone was spilling their guts about how bad the software is, while the OpenBSD developers just pulled in the code and started to work on it instead of bike shedding. So his question to us can be summed up as a validation on the path of entry I've picked to get really well into the project. He says he can't jump ship and reinstall my current OS, Arch Linux, since I just quit my job after 7 years to work full-time on a startup that was in stealth phase for the last 3 years. I think I am just afraid to find myself without a working setup for even just a couple days, as I will have to push crazy hours to get our business running. So the approach he took is as follows. I subscribe to the OpenBSD mailing list, CVS bugs, miscellaneous tech. He's learning tons from just following the discussions. He says, I started running OpenBSD in a QEMU instance on my current box, and I intend to follow current on it. He says, I'm learning the system usage in QEMU and following changes from the recent commits in the tree. That's good. And he says, our production server at the startup is running FreeBSD, and I'm using this as an additional reference point while learning.
Using a little bit of everything definitely helps, because you learn what stuff is the same across Linux, FreeBSD, and OpenBSD, and then what stuff is different, and what's better at doing what. And you find that oftentimes there's no one answer to what's the best. FreeBSD is the best at this, and OpenBSD has got better PF or whatever, and so on.
Sure. He says, when things settle down, I intend to switch my main OS from Arch to OpenBSD on my laptop to start actually using the system on a daily basis and just work from there. He said, most probably starting on the ports tree if something I use regularly is messing. So he says, regarding the plan I laid out, would you have any additional suggestions on what I could do? Is the approach sane, or am I just paranoid and should jump the gun and switch my main OS? In your eyes, is the above path a solid way to get involved with the project?
I would say,
We'll
just answer that quick. It definitely looks like the right approach. He's subscribing to the mailing lists and stuff. You can also find people on IRC. There's, whether it's like the Metabug or the OpenBSD channel on Freenode or whatever. And same with the FreeBSD channels on IRC as well. But yeah, start playing with it, even in just a virtual machine, learning it, asking questions, reading other people's questions, looking at the docs. Definitely seems like the right approach.
So, I mean, I guess he sounds like he's doing it on a laptop here. One thing I would do, just if I was personally doing it this way, I would just grab another hard drive and throw it in my machine on a weekend, start setting it up. And, if I don't get it finished by Monday morning or whenever, no big deal. I just throw my old drive back in and go to work. And then that way I have time to work on it. And it's not an urgent, like, wow, I got to get this up and running by tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. so I can go work on my day job.
Yeah, likely.
Of course, that requires you buy something.
Right.
But
my laptop,
that's just the way I would do it.
I could take out the CD drive and put in a second hard drive. And so I have, stuff that I need Windows to record interviews and stuff when we're out at conferences. And then I have PCBSD for actually getting work done, because especially working on the documentation, a bunch of those tools only work under BSD.
Sure. And he adds a PS here. Your show has been great for me, he said, both from an entertainment standpoint and as a source of information regarding news and tutorials. Please keep up the good work. If I could ask for a single tutorial topic, it would be creating a new port for those of us that would like to port an app that was not yet ported over to one of the BSDs, covering mostly the basic steps like layout, build system integration, packaging, etc. That is a good tutorial. That's something that would be fun to do, like the skinny on building a makefile.
Yeah.
And then what's the dist info? What's the plist? What's all this?
I don't know how different the OpenBSD way of doing it is.
That is true. Well, I think we should just do separate tutorials for those. We're going to look at a FreeBSD port today, and this is package.
I might be able to force my friend Price to build that tutorial for us as he learns this process, because he's been learning to update a couple of the ports that he uses for I think it was TeamSpeak, the voice chat server, and the game server for something or other. And he's coming to BSD Cam as my guest, so I will put him to work.
Oh, there you go.
And,
there you go. Payback.
Johannes and I are working on the 64-bit Linux ports tree stuff while we're there. So I'll be knee-deep in ports.
Speaking of, when you see him, remind him to get his other stuff committed here soon. The update to CentOS 6.5.
Yeah, well, we'll be working on that and the support for 64-bit CentOS 6.5.
Yeah, put that in soon because there's a new Skype in there, and if we can get the group chat version, I can dump my other system here on the side. So get that in as soon as possible. Well, cool. Well, I hope we answered your question there, Adam, and we wish you luck with your new journey into OpenBSD land. So as we wrap up the show, of course, we want to do some of the usual mentions. Of course, all the tutorials are going to be posted in their entirety at bsdnow.tv, so go check them out, including past ones. You'll also find a link there to Bob Beck's LibreSSL talk from the end of May. We finally found a recording.
A second recording. I think we had one before, but it was different.
A second recording. Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll go check that out. That'll be interesting. Of course, send your questions, comments, show ideas or topics, or stories you'd like mentioned on the show to feedback at bsdnow.tv. We'd appreciate that, and we'll be happy to put it on the air in a future week. So if you'd like to come on for an interview, have a tutorial you'd like to see, let us know. Interviews for sure. I mean, if there's something interesting you're working on any of the BSDs, go ahead and shoot us something. We'll schedule a time to get with you on Skype, and we'll record that. Of course, you can watch live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1800 UTC, so try and make it out for that and watch all the fun banter in between the segments that end up on the recorded show. And we're going to, of course, mention next week Alan's going to be at BSD Cam out at Cambridge in the UK. So we'll have a pre-recorded episode then, but we'll still have something here with a
great interview with Josh Petzel about some ZFS war stories and what's coming up in FreeNAS, including FreeNAS 10, which would be a while out, but all the cool plans going on there.
Sure. So definitely check that out next week while Alan's away.
Oh, and we also wanted to mention that there are NYC Bug and CoBug meetings this week. So if you're in New York or Colorado, you should definitely check out your local BSD user group and hang out with cool people in person.
Definitely. Cool. So we'll be back in a future week, same time, same place. Thanks, folks. So you're planning to deploy 100 OpenBSD systems. Do you install the release image and then manually patch them all for errata? Well, what a waste of time. I mean, it'd be much more efficient just to build one single ISO image with all the patches applied to it already. You can even use it in combination with the auto install feature for very fast mass deployment. The tutorial today is going to show you how to create your own bootable ISO or install sets that contain all the fixes in the stable branch. This is all being done on a regular OpenBSD box and has the side benefit of also updating it to the latest stable branch in the process. So to get started, let's check out the source code for the stable branch, and this is going to assume you don't have anything already set up in the user source or user Xenokara directories. So go ahead and take it away, Alan.
Okay, so building the latest OpenBSD and making your own ISOs. So if you want to install off the ISO, the issue is that the ISOs on the OpenBSD website are based on the release version from however long ago and are missing all the security patches. So with this system, what we'll do is we'll download an updated source tree and build our own ISO with the patches. Whether you want to do that by getting the source the release source and just applying the patches to it, or if you actually want to track stable or current or whatever and use CVS. So we can use CVS here. Just grab that here and slide that down. So we do a CVS checkout and pull down the source and Xenokara trees. That'll give us source, which is OpenBSD, and Xenokara is OpenBSD's fork of Xorg that can run without needing root. Then we can just go into our the usersys arch architecture, in our case i386 conf, and we can run config on the generic.mp, which is our multiprocessor kernel. Then we go to the compile directory, and then just by doing make clean, make install, we can then have built and installed a new kernel. So as a side effect, this will update the system we're working on to the version that we're building the ISO for as well. Then, if we want to build the rest of the operating system, go back to the user source directory. We can do make object, which will create all of our object directories. Then we can install all the new etc files. And then when we go back to the source directory, a simple make build will compile the entire operating system. I'm not doing these steps right now because I've done them already cooking show style because it'll take a long time. So next, sorry, lost my window. So now that we've built the entire operating system, we can now build X. So if we go to user Xenokara, again, make Bootstrap, which will build all the tools required to build Xenokara. Then the same, make objects directories, which will create all the stuff we need. And then make build will compile Xenokara. Then, and now that we've done that, we're ready to actually build our patched install media. So if we set our destination directory and our release directory, make sure those don't already exist. If they do, we'll rename them and clean it up. Then we can make the release and destination directories. So we have nice, fresh directories. Then if we go user source etc, we're going to do make release, and this will install all the etc stuff to that target directory. Then if we go to our distribution sets here, we can run make flist, which will generate all that stuff we need. Then if we go to our Xenokara directory, create its release and destination directories, and run make release, that'll build our version of X install files. Then when we go to /root, we can see that we have a release directory with tar files in it. So we can make an OpenBSD directory. Then we can move all those release files into the machine directory, in our case i386. Then we'll create a directory based on the version number. Then we'll move the architecture into the version number, and then move that version number into OpenBSD. So now we have OpenBSD style directory structure, right? OpenBSD /5.5/i386. And in here will be all the sets if we had compiled them all. And now you just have to do the last bit. We can use, right, if we're back in that directory, with our files, we can use the checksum to generate the checksums. Then we can signify those. So now we have signatures for our files. And lastly, we can install package add CDR tools, which will give us the stuff we need to actually make an ISO. So I will quickly download and install that. Then if we just go back to /root, we can run the make isofs. And this will create an install.iso based on all those files we just built. And that would work if I had actually managed to finish compiling in time. But with these commands, which you can find on our website, you can now build your OpenBSD ISO with all the patches, whether those are custom patches or just the security errata. That way, when you're doing a fresh install a couple months after release, you don't have to manually update each of the systems after the install. And that's how you do that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week.